This is a Word with an International production with Gail Knox, covering the book of John.
An overview of chapter 1 next. You know, the first lesson you did an overview of the entire book, and then we're going to kind of keep moving down and get in a little bit closer to the, I don't know how to say, get deeply and more deeply involved in the text. So the next thing we want to do is come down to chapter 1, and we'll go chapter by chapter, but we first must overview that chapter 1 to get a big picture of that particular chapter. So on pages 8 and 9 in your workbook is where you were doing that big picture on chapter 1. Did you have any questions about anything there? Because we didn't spend any time going over the details on how to do this. So if you have questions, we need to clear that up now so that you can do it as we get into the other chapters. Okay, let's just look at a few of them. What time references did you mark in chapter 1? In the beginning, in verse 1, in the beginning in verse 2, which is, as has been pointed out, a very important time phrase, isn't it? Why? What is important about this time phrase? It's proof of his deity, isn't it? It means he is eternal. If he existed in the beginning, no human being could have possibly existed in the beginning and still be around, right? It shows no human being could have existed in the beginning, period. It shows his deity. Other time phrases. Verse 30, what does verse 30 say? There's quite a few before that. Okay, let's look at, there's different kinds of time references. How about verse 15? That's another kind of time reference, isn't it? John testified about him and cried out, saying, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me has a higher rank than I, for he existed before me." So, what is the time phrase there? After me, before me, okay? So however you were marking time references, I would mark that. Now, that's completely different from in the beginning, isn't it? In the beginning is trying to point to a specific period in time. Before me and after me is relative, isn't it? It's basing something according to something else. So that's another way of another type of time reference, and this one uses several. Verse 27 has the same thing, the after me. Verse 29, the next day. That's more like in the beginning, isn't it? It's pointing to a specific time. Now, it isn't spelled out like December 25th, but it's defined as the next day, so it's that same kind. Verse 30, again, is the after and before. Verse 35 is another next day. If I'm missing some that you have written, just pipe up.
I put 18. No one has seen God at any time. So that's eternity.
Okay, all right, that's a good one. Yeah, I did not mark that, but I think it should be. That's good. At any time, okay? That's the whole spectrum of infinity, isn't it? Any others? Okay, do you hear that one? In verse 19, this is the testimony of John. When the Jews sent to him priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask, "Who are you?" So it's one of those very vague periods in time, but it does tell us time when something else happened, okay? That would be the same, actually, sometimes we'll see during Pentecost. That's that kind of time, isn't it? Okay, any others before I'm at verse 39? I haven't even done verse 39 yet, but. 22. Oh, okay. That's a sequence kind of time. You could mark those. We want to be careful not to mark too many I don't usually mark those, but I will, like in Revelation, after these things, and that's the same kind of thing, but it carries more importance there than here. Okay, look at verse 39. He talks about, for it was about the 10th hour. Do you know when the 10th hour is? In the morning? No. The Jewish day begins at 6 a.m., okay? So if you can do 5th grade math, you know when the 10th hour is. I had to struggle with it and count on my fingers, but about 4 o'clock, right, exactly. 4 o'clock in the afternoon would be the 10th hour. And that's important for us to know when you start reading about the crucifixion and all of that. It makes your understanding so much deeper if you can know what the time of days are involved there, because they talk in terms of what hour it is. Yeah. 6 a.m. Their day starts at 6 a.m., yeah. And that's what they're counting from when they say the 1st hour, the 10th hour, the 12th hour, and so on and so forth. Right. Well, that's another kind, but it does start at, there's a period of the watch, yeah. You're thinking of the Sabbath starts on Friday evening, okay? But counting the day, and that would be what, the 12th hour. The Sabbath starts at the 12th hour. 43, the next day. And any others that you've come up with. For now, you just want to mark. It's better to overmark than to undermark, because you don't know which ones are going to be important. But the more you do this kind of study, at some point you'll be able to say, that's not important and I won't even mark it. But until you're able to do that, you want to mark it so that you can pinpoint things more easily when you're just glancing down at your worksheet here.
So that I better understand it.
Yeah.
Sometime as we go on, we're going to want to come back and refer to the time that such and such happened.
That is a possibility, okay? You don't always use all these things that I'm telling you to do, all right? But when you mark your scripture in this way, then you're able to look at it, and that starts telling you what is important about the chapter, okay? So, yeah, a lot of this you go back and use. Sometimes you don't go back and use it. But if you haven't marked it, it's never going to come up and hit you in the face, okay? That's why I said at some point you'll know, even as you're reading, I don't need to mark this. And it gets easier and easier for you, and your pages look a lot nicer than...
It's easier to read sometimes.
Sure it does.
You know who him is, or you look at it and say, oh, that's God, or that's Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, to start out, overmark rather than undermark, and then you'll start finding out what it's for. I probably had done this for 3 years before I really started understanding the value of what I was doing. So you just have to be faithful and do it, and then at some point it starts teaching you, and it's just incredible what it can do for you. Okay? All right. Let's see some others. Contrast and comparisons. A contrast is showing the difference between two things or two statements, and it usually can be spotted by the words but, however, nevertheless. Sometimes none of those words are in there. It's still a contrast because it's showing the difference between one thing and the other. What contrast did you find in chapter 1? These were not big contrasts.
Well, verse 11 and 12.
11 and 12.
It says, he came to his own, those who were his own did not receive him, but many as received him, to them they give right to become children of God. So those did not receive, those who did receive.
Oh, okay. I was really wondering where you were going on that because I didn't even mark that. But yeah, you see what he's saying? In verse 11, he talks about those who did not receive him. And then in verse 12, he says he's talking about those who did receive him. And it's in two statements there. That makes it hard to see. But as many as received him, to them. So it's to those who received him that he gave the right to be called children of God. So you have a contrast there between those who didn't receive him and those who did receive him. Okay? Yeah, yeah. That's the thing on a contrast or a comparison. It's individual as to how much of it you underline to show the contrast. Here, they did it differently. One does the whole phrase, and another one just put receive and not receive, right? Get down to just the words. And something like that, I'm not sure you'll ever use. Comparisons are something that I probably use less than the other things, but when I see something in a comparison, it is extremely important. You learn sometimes just as much by what it is not as you do by what it is. Does that make sense to you? I worked for all these managers when I was in business, either because I was promoted or they were promoted. And so I had the benefit of seeing all kinds of managers, and I learned more from those who I didn't want to emulate than those I did want to emulate. So the opposite sometimes is very valuable information. Okay, some other...
I put verse 5.
Verse 5?
Yeah.
Okay.
The light shines in the darkness.
Okay, and the...
Darkness does not come.
So the contrast there would be between shines and doesn't comprehend, because shining, well, okay, that's not a parallel kind of contrast, because the light shines, the people refuse it. So it's not something the light does and something the light doesn't do. Do you understand what I'm saying there? Technically, it would be a... what? Yes, I would say technically you can call that a contrast. But let's look at, yeah, 8. Not the light. He was not the light, but he came to testify about the light. Okay? So that is a little bit more along the lines of a contrast that we would mark in here. He's not the light, but is not, but came to but testifies. What about verse 15? The after and before. We marked it for something else, but it's also a contrast, isn't it? And now that's one of those that it really has a lot of meaning to us, and we'll talk about it later. But the law, verse 17, the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ. The contract is the law under Moses and grace and truth under Jesus Christ. Or you may have just underlined law and compared it with grace and truth. That's a contrast right there, isn't it? Or you might have contrasted Moses and Jesus Christ, because there's a huge contrast there. But to me, the issue is the law, Moses' law, and Jesus' grace and truth, or the contrast.
What about verse 11 and 12? Those who did not receive him, but as many as received him.
Yes, it would be from what happened to the received and the not received, yes. And that was the one that Rodney was talking about. Okay, do you see any others? I want to question any. Okay, what do you have?
Verse
51, at the very end.
kind of simple. You will see the heavens open to the angels of God ascending and descending.
Oh, okay. Now,
Kind of a simple.
that's a very simple one, and that's the kind of contrast that I wouldn't mark myself, because it really doesn't add to the meaning. But it is a contrast, isn't it? Ascending and descending. So, again, better to mark those in the beginning. Don't worry about whether it's a simple one or a real one or a complex one. Better to mark more than to not mark them at all. Okay, but in time you would go, I'm not going to mark that. Yeah, Dixie?
What about 13 where it says the will of God, will of man, but of God?
Oh, wait a minute. Who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And we even have the classic contrast word there, but, don't we? Not born of man and the will of flesh or the will of man. 3 things there. But on the other side would be of God. Absolutely. And probably an important one, and I didn't mark that one. So, what is much the same? 20? I studied that one for a long time. Verse 20, and he confessed and did not deny, but confessed, I am not the Christ. And it caught my eye because of the word but, so I figured it was a contrast, but then I got bogged down in he confessed, he did not confess, but he confessed. And you could deny but confessed. Like I said, I just got hung up on the fact that he confessed and he did not confess. So, and I didn't get beyond that. Yeah. Verse 33. I did not recognize him, but he who sent me to baptize in water said to me, he upon... Okay. Between baptizing in water and baptizing in the Holy Spirit. It is. What did you underline to show that? Okay, and that would be a case where there's no connecting word there at all. You don't have a but or however or nevertheless or anything, but it's definitely contrasting thoughts, and it's an important contrast as far as the understanding of the book of John is all about, right? Okay, any others? Okay, for some of you, you may have gone, some of you really are very, very good at this. For others, you may have been feeling, I didn't see that. So not to worry about it. These are things that are not easy to pick up for all of us. Our minds just don't work that way. That's why I like to go over them in class so that you can start hearing what other people are seeing, and it will get easier. That I will promise you. We were also asked to mark the testimonies that are given in this first chapter. Remember I said John's going to prove his point with miracles that he calls signs and testimonies. And we have lots of testimonies in chapter 1.